Well, good afternoon, everybody. In this sermon today, I want to look at the wonderful instruction that the Word of God can give us. The title of the sermon is Bible Gems. I just want to look today at some of the advice given in the Book of Proverbs. First of all, what does it mean to be a gem? Put simply, it means a personal thing held to be a perfect example, a treasure, something that is valued for its beauty or perception, something prized because of its beauty or worth. One commentator stated the following: the book of Proverbs in the Bible is filled with verses that guide us in our everyday life. Proverbs teach us how to act, behave, and decide for virtually any situation. Proverbs heavily contrast wisdom and foolishness, helping readers decipher between right and wrong, according to the Holy Word. Many modern-day sayings came from the Book of Proverbs. A proverb is a short, pithy, or meaningful statement that expresses a basic truth or practical concept. Let us first of all look at the first 7 verses of chapter 1 in the Book of Proverbs. The subheading is The Beginning of Knowledge. Proverbs 1, starting in verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. Barnes' notes on the Bible state the following: the writer's purpose is to educate. He is writing what might be called an ethical handbook for the young, though not only for the young. Of all books in the Old Testament, this is the one which we may think of as most distinctly and distinctively educational. Verse 3, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and direction. Verse 5, a wise man will hear and increase learning. A man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Clarke's commentary states that the fear of the Lord in the preceding verses shows Solomon giving the advantage of acting according to the dictates of wisdom. In the following verses, he shows the danger of acting contrary to them. And so, let us look at some gems today. Number 1, which follows the verses we started out with, Proverbs 1, verses 10 to 16. And this is about shunning evil counsel. So the first gem is for us to shun evil counsel. Sounds simple enough, but just look at the world around us. Verse 10, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. A straightforward admonition, but one that many fall into such a trap. Barnes' commentary says that the first great danger which besets the simple and the young is that of evil companionship. The only safety is to be found in the power of saying no to all such invitations. It's amazing how in these end times, when evil has increased to such levels in all aspects of life, how many are involved in evil schemes. The young are particularly susceptible to such bad counsel, but many older people can also fall into the trap. Take, for example, the compensation culture where some feign injury, like whiplash, in order to make money. The fact that it is lying and deception doesn't seem to bother too many people, and others can follow their bad example. I know that the verses we've read talk about evil counsel regarding shedding blood and violence, burglary, personal attacks, and so on, but evil counsel can prevail in many other ways. I've been pestered by companies on 2 counts, one saying that they understood that I may have been missold payment protection insurance where the banks have been paying out in the UK billions in compensation. But that didn't apply to me, but these companies wanted to try it on with the banks who did missell this. In addition, my wife had a very minor car accident a number of years ago where no one was hurt, but we were told that there was about £5,500 available to claim. I said that no one was hurt and no claim would be made. We also know that in the UK, welfare benefits are claimed where some feign disability and illness, and many have been exposed in this respect. Claiming where there is no legitimate claim is just plain wrong, and this is the sort of evil that we, as members of the Church of God, must never entertain. It was amazingly coincidental that whilst I was working on this part of the sermon, that I had a phone call which was a message saying that this would be the last phone call that I would receive regarding the compensation that we could claim for that accident some years ago. They never seem to give up until they have exhausted every particular avenue. I doubt that it is likely that a church member will go out and shed blood for evil gain, but we have to be careful of the more subtle attempts that Satan makes and can tempt us with, that of claiming something to which we are not really entitled to through evil counsel. It may be tempting if we are not 100% committed God's way or 100% of the time, but we must resist. We are told to shun evil counsel, and it is evil counsel to fill our houses with spoil, as it states in verse 13, and this doesn't have to be just through robbery and violence. It can be by using deception. We must never be tempted by any such financial gain. We know that we will reap what we sow, so let us always shun counsel in whatever form it may take in these wrong areas. Gem number 2 is found in Proverbs 15 verse 1, if you'll turn over a few pages there. Proverbs 15 verse 1, where it states something that we have read so many times before, but is so applicable to the way that we should behave. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So the second gem is a soft answer turns away wrath. Clark's commentary on this is spot on. It states, a soft answer, gentleness will often disarm the most furious where positive derangement has not taken place. One angry word will always beget another, for the disposition of one spirit always begets its own likeness in another. Thus kindness produces kindness, and rage produces rage. Universal experience confirms this proverb. How easy it can be for any of us to return like for like, and how often have we done this? Some may argue with us unnecessarily, and we return like for like. Does that sound familiar to you? Even if they are wrong in what they say, they can be hopping mad because they may have got hold of the wrong end of the stick. How easy is it for us to return like for like? It's so easy. And how often have you and I done this? Believe it or not, there are members of the Church of God who are delicate creatures, sensitive and supersensitive, who will not let a matter go and can be quite harsh in their approach to such matters. Of course, you and I don't fit into that category, do we? I heard the story of one person who was harangued by this other person about a particular issue. The person on the receiving end either couldn't get a word in edgeways or wasn't trying to. A few minutes later, the person handing out the treatment ran out of things to say and finished by saying, "Well, I just wanted to get that off my chest." In fact, a soft answer was not even needed in this particular case. Someone who worked both as a teacher and in customer service said, "It's good advice, as anyone who works with people will tell you, whether teaching or in customer service. When dealing with surly people of any kind, if you keep your own demeanour calm and your own voice calm and normal, as opposed to raising your voice, then that will usually calm the person you're dealing with. When you get frustrated and raise your voice, that will only lead to an already frustrated or angry person becoming even more so and more difficult to deal with." There's the voice of experience. It really is better to address the situation and not the person, and to reason with the person concerned, gently, kindly, assuring them that you are trying to sort out the problem. Of course, there may be someone from time to time who is not open to gentle and helpful reasoning, but in my experience that would certainly be the exception rather than the general rule. Another person wrote, "There is one fact about difficult people. They are looking for a fight. They shout at you in hope that you will shout back. They are feeding on your anger. This means the only way to overcome them is to starve them of the energy they need. Do not shout back. Do not repay evil for evil. Do good to those who do evil. A soft answer turns away wrath. When you give soft answers, instead of harsh words, you are effectively weakening the position of the difficult people. They need to feed off your anger to sustain theirs. As long as you refuse to cooperate, they will find it a very tiring situation to maintain their anger. Soon they will have to give way. You will win." This is God's formula to deal with difficult people. Now, I like that observation. When everyone around you seems to be in bad spirits, bickering and complaining, take a step back. It's so easy to answer in kind. We've all done it. I've done it. I've done it too often for my own comfort. But instead, feel into your heart and answer gently. Let peace radiate from you. A frustrated mother wrote, "The hurried bedtimes, the snappy answers, the not having time for 1,000 4-year-olds' questions, the uncaring, brash tone I wore just especially for my husband. All these things stirred up anger in the hearts of those I loved the most. And when you're exasperated and lonely and exhausted, the last thing you need is anger, because that anger breeds more harsh answers. And so the cycle of sin and selfishness, a never-ending, joyless grind. But oh, the sweetness when our eyes are opened, the scales peeled away, and the truth revealed. I do not have to be a slave to my feelings," she wrote. "No, I can actually surrender my feelings, my desire to lash out, lose my temper, and say what later on I'll regret. I can stop and surrender to a Heavenly Father who comes to the rescue, breathes life into my lungs, and enables me to exhale loving words, gentle answers. And then, as always, the Word of God proves true. You give a gentle answer, and it turns away wrath. And when that darkness is gone, light has room to move right in." I think that was an excellent quote from someone who had gone through such difficult times. How many times have we answered like for like? And has that come from anger? I have fallen foul of this at times, even since baptism decades ago. And it's when we are not close enough to God that it can happen. And when we forget the instruction that we have read many times, It is a real gem to say a soft answer turns away wrath, and to mean it and to practice it. Gem number 3 is in Proverbs 12 verse 26, if you'll turn there. Proverbs 12 verse 26. The righteous should choose his friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray. So this is talking about the company that we keep. So gem number 3 is the company you keep. How very true that is. We often think about young people when this is discussed, erroneously thinking that it applies only to them. But beware, it can apply to almost everyone. Let us discuss, first of all, our young people. How many young people, say teenagers, have been led astray on the internet? Some have been groomed by sexual predators over a period of time without realizing it, and then find out the hard way that it wasn't the friendship that they expected it to be. Parents can have a very hard time of it when trying to keep their young ones on the right path. Many young people have been radicalized on the internet, and some finish up in a ridiculous war against those whom they are told are their enemies, and all for a pagan faith with so many unscrupulous operators. In February 2015, Lady Warsi, a former member of the Conservative Liberal Coalition government in the UK, said, "Much resource has gone into making sure websites are taken down, but we are fighting an ever-losing battle with extremist groups. One of the things that Islamic State has been incredibly successful at has been using the internet and social networking spaces for their own propaganda." There have been many cases shown where young people have followed that grotesque way of life. What company did these young people keep? Quite simply, the wrong sort of company, which can be an ever-present concern with the parents of youngsters today. It is possible that they could find themselves involved in a terrorist war where so many can and do get unnecessarily killed or maimed. One writer gave these insightful comments. When we were younger, we were most likely warned by our parents to be careful of whom we choose to spend our time with. They said this in reference to the way others would judge us in accordance to our friends, in addition to the influence our friends would have upon us. We have all heard the saying that birds of a feather flock together, meaning that the company you keep reflects your personality. A smart person surrounds himself with other smart people. If you hang out with trash, you will be perceived as trash. You really are only as good as the company you keep. As you go through life, you begin to realize how important it is to have true friends. Navigating your 20s is a difficult and confusing time, and better travelled with wholesome, close friends by your side. Unfortunately, as we go through this time, we realize the people that we once counted on are no longer the people we once thought they were. The type of people you surround yourself with speaks of your values and what you stand for. We have all heard the concept of being guilty by association, the act of people associating your behaviours and thoughts with the people you hang out with. If one of your friends acts in a negative way, you will be lumped in with him or her. Despite if this is true or not, it is all based on perception. Regardless if you believe yourself to be an altruistic person, a time may come when your bad company starts to influence your good behaviour. It is better to be alone than in the wrong company. Tell me who your best friends are, and I will tell you who you are. If you run with wolves, you will learn to howl, but if you associate with eagles, you will learn how to soar to great heights. I thought those, again, were great comments. The comments that I've given so far have applied to teenagers and those in their 20s, and there's some good advice there. But we older folk can just be as easily swayed if we're not careful. How many times have older people in financial need been swayed by the wrong company so that they have to extricate themselves from a difficult situation? The company you keep can apply to anyone and everyone, and with Satan so active in the world today, his fingerprints are everywhere. Let none of us be deluded into thinking that this can only apply to others and not to us. In Proverbs 13 verse 20, if you turn there, we read further instructions on this. Proverbs 13 verse 20. He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed. This has been in the Bible for a very long time, but how many have read this and taken its instruction? And how many have ignored this, and to their cost? If any of us allow wrong and evil influences into our lives, we will certainly be the losers. And this Bible gem of watching the company that we keep for all of us is of paramount importance. Bible gem number 4 is found in Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5. Proverbs 26, verse 4. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. So the fourth gem, answering and not answering a fool. There are those that say, because they don't understand, that this is a Bible contradiction, but these verses actually complement each other. Let us first of all look at Proverbs 26 verse 4, where it tells us not to answer a fool according to his folly, lest we be like him. In this situation, to answer someone who is argumentative or has a question might mean that we might have to descend to his level and end up in a meaningless and inappropriate discussion. We have to have the discernment to know whether the person is actually asking the question he really wants to know the answer to, or is either not interested or looking for an argument, and it is important that we don't give such a person an opportunity to do so. Simply put, he does not want to be taught or enlightened. There are those who love to debate for debate's sake and argue just for the fun of it. From these types of people, we need to discern their motives. We know that, for example, some people love to debate religion. Jesus Christ gives us an excellent example of not answering in Luke 20, if you turn there, verses 1 to 8. This is the account where the Pharisees questioned the authority of Jesus. They were not looking to learn anything, but trying to trap him in his own words. Luke 20, verse 1. Now it happened on one of those days, as he taught the people in the temple and preached the gospel, that the chief priests and the scribes, together with the elders, confronted him and spoke to him, saying, Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Or who is he who gave you this authority? Verse 3. But he answered and said to them, I will also ask you one thing, and answer me. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? Verse 5. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, If we say from heaven, he will say, Why then did you not believe him? But if we say from men, all the people will stone us, for they are persuaded that John was a prophet. So they answered that they did not know where it was from. And Jesus said to them, Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Rather than answering their question, Jesus turned the tables on them and asked them a very pointed question. It was an outstanding answer, as we would expect, one of very many. and they simply couldn't answer this without condemning themselves as they reasoned in verses 5 and 6. The Pharisees simply would not answer this question, and so the discussion was dropped, and we can learn much from this. Now, looking at Proverbs 26 verse 5, we read, "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes." Let's quickly look at an example in 2 Corinthians 11 verse 23. 2 Corinthians 11 verse 23. Paul says, "Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more, in labours more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often." In verse 13, just above this, we read, "For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ." It appears from this passage that certain men at Corinth claimed to be the true apostles of Jesus Christ, but they were not, as we read in verse 13. Paul had to counter this claim because if he had remained silent on this issue, it would have given tacit approval of these men who were seeking to lead the church astray. It could have gone to their head, thinking that their erroneous reasoning was correct, and they could easily have gained more followers who might have swallowed their line. It was necessary here for Paul to issue correction to those who were in error so that they would take notice and not follow those who were not genuine. From these two examples about giving an answer and not giving an answer shows that there is no contradiction. The Nelson Bible Study stated the following: "The phrase 'according to his folly' appears twice as a play on words with two shades of meaning. On the one hand, it means to avoid the temptation to stoop to his level, that is, don't use his methods, lest you should be like him. On the other hand, it means avoid the temptation to ignore him altogether, that is, respond in some way, or else he will become wise in his own eyes and his folly will get worse." We need to ask God to give us the wisdom necessary to discern when and how to apply these principles, replying and not replying as appropriate. Gem number 5 is found in Proverbs 3 verse 7. This is, "Do not be wise in your own eyes." Proverbs 3 verse 7 says, "Do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and depart from evil." One commentator made these observations: "One of the challenges of learning is that we can think that we know more than we actually do. But this proverb tells us that as we take a different posture to the things that we think we know, we open up ourselves to new information that can be tipping points for us. There is little benefit in being wise in our own eyes, so humility is a necessity with knowledge. Humility keeps the fear of the Lord in front and of us, and opens our eyes and ears to the wonderful things that can bring to our lives. Take some time and ask questions of those around you. You might be amazed at different perspectives, and that can revitalize you and give you new strength. I would add to those comments the fact that if you and I, become a know-all, no one can tell us anything because we have great personal capacity and understanding and are wise in our own eyes, then trouble lies ahead for us. Others tend to shy away from those who are wise in their own eyes because they will rarely listen to any other point of view, as they have all the answers, all nicely packaged up. Decades ago, I was taught that we have one mouth and two ears, and we should use them in that ratio. We should listen twice as much as we talk, because that is how we can learn. There is not a lot of learning to be done. There's not a lot of learning taking place. on our part if we do almost all the talking. There is the question of humility, and that is a requirement from God. Please turn to Isaiah 5 verse 21, which is not complimentary about being wise in one's own eyes. Isaiah 5 verse 21. It says, "Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight." Someone wise in his own eyes is hardly likely to be a humble person. They can think that they are the fount of all knowledge. Even if they were, which is hardly likely, a humble person wouldn't want to show off all of his education, his training, his understanding, and maybe a high IQ. It is, in effect, a protest against self-sufficiency, self-conceit, and self-reliance, which are not godly characteristics. And as the pulpit commentary says, it commends humility. The diligent search for wisdom is commanded. The great hindrance to all true wisdom is the thought that we have already attained it. How very true. And so gem number 5 is not to be wise in our own eyes, as it will lead us away from the way of God, a way that we know is the only way. The next gem number 6, is found in Proverbs 2, verses 3 to 6. Proverbs 2, verse 3. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, if you seek her as silver and search for her as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Verse 6, he stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. So number 6 is to cry out for discernment. Someone who cries out for discernment is not someone who is wise in his own eyes. And so this gem follows on very nicely from the previous one. Discernment is the ability to judge well. One commentator said that in its simplest form, discernment is nothing more than the ability to decide between truth and error, right and wrong. Discernment is the process of making careful distinctions in our thinking about truth. In other words, the ability to think with discernment is synonymous with an ability to think biblically. Ah, yes, that is the key, to think biblically. What would God think, do, and say in any set of circumstances? Let's look at 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 21 and 22. These are good verses to think about in this regard. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 21. It says, "Test all things, hold fast what is good, abstain from every form of evil." And in 1 John 5 verse 1, further discernment is alluded to. 1 John 5 verse 1. "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." It is imperative that we live an uncompromising Christian life which comes from our ability to discern truth from error. If we have questionable discernment when it comes to truth and error, we can easily be led off the straight and narrow, and we know that straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leads unto life, and few there be that find it. And that's just a quotation of Jesus Christ that he stated in Matthew 7 verse 14. Discernment may well be part of the Christian faith of many believers. Why do I say this? Well, we saw over 27 years ago that tens of thousands couldn't discern truth from old error and left the church. Their discernment, if they ever had any, deserted them at a most critical time. They engaged in wrong action, being led astray because they didn't really know and understand the true way of God. As one person said, they are not armed to take decidedly biblical stand against the onslaught of unbiblical thinking and attitudes that face them throughout their day. And I would add, not just the day, but throughout their lives, as we have to be remaining faithful to God right to the very end. It is indispensable to an uncompromising life. It is incumbent upon the Christian to seize the discernment that God has provided. He's provided for us in His precious truth. Without it, Christians are at risk of being tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, as it states in Ephesians 4 verse 4. Discernment is something that is permanently needed, and failure to ask for and to use this quality could land us in a great spiritual trouble. The Bible advises and gives us all the discernment we need to face all of the trials and tests that we face so often. Seek discretion. It is so much value and importance. A previous gem that I raised a few minutes ago was that of when to answer and not to answer a fool. And discernment is knowing when and not to answer in any particular case. So many of these gems can be interconnected, but please remember that discretion is vital to our Christian life and development. Gem number 7 is found in Proverbs 18 verse 13, and this is one that I'm sure we've all fallen foul of in the past, to hear both sides of the story. Proverbs 18 verse 13 says, "He who answers a matter before he hears it is a folly and a shame to him." We are to hear both sides of the story. This is absolutely brilliant and simple advice. And how many times have we fallen foul of it? We can answer a matter without hearing any sides of the story because of what a third party may tell us. And if one person tells us their side of the story, we can believe them. There is an old saying about getting your side of the story heard first. In Proverbs 18 verse 17, just 4 verses later, we read, "The first to plead his cause seems right, until his neighbour comes and examines him." There's the answer. It is interesting and can be embarrassing when we eventually hear the other side of the story and realise that there may be fault on both sides of the argument, but we may have sided with the one that we heard first. If so, then there is backtracking to do. A lot of it, probably, but none of this would have been necessary had we taken notice of this proverb. Pett's commentary on the Bible states that the subsection ends with a warning that we should not say anything or believe anything until we are sure of the facts. It is a folly and shame to respond to something before we have learned the truth. But that is exactly what the whisperer of Proverbs 18 verse 8 does. Let's read that. Proverbs 18 verse 8. "The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. He passes half-truths and downright lies on, because they are more salacious. But it is an evidence of his folly and something which brings great shame on him. He cannot wait until he has heard the truth, and so he constantly interrupts and argues without having the full facts. This is one reason why, even if he went to the wise with a payment in his hand, he would learn nothing." How many times have you and I given our definitive judgment on a matter before the whole issue has been heard? I suspect that at one time or another we have all been guilty of this on a number of occasions. We may express an opinion before hearing the other side of the story, and when you think about it, that is silly, stupid, it's absurd, it's ridiculous, and it's foolish. How many situations have been judged unnecessarily in such a way? How many people have been offended by our decisions based on limited input? How many friendships have been ended because of such rash behaviour? And how many family feuds have emanated by ignoring this simple and yet so correct course of action? Let us never be one who answers a matter before he hears it, because as the proverb states, if we do, it is a folly and a shame to him. And let us never forget the harm that it can do to other people if we don't take the advice of always hearing the matter from both sides and in full before we make any comments. Bible gem number 8 is found in child discipline. Proverbs 22 verse 6. It says, Proverbs 22 verse 6, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old he will never depart from it, or he will not depart from it. Number 8 is child discipline. Oh, that this proverb was taken seriously today in the world. It is incredible how poor parenting it can be in the world. The skills are deficient, I think, as never before. How many times have I seen, maybe you too, small children running rings round their parents, even kicking, hitting, spitting at them, as well as verbal abuse, and the parents just seem to put up with it. There is a saying attributed to St. Francis Xavier who said, "Give me the child until he is 7, and I'll give you the man." It is the training from birth that will mould the child, but work has to be put into the raising of children, which it appears today not too many are willing to do. All parents should teach their children right from wrong, but the problem today in society is that they very often don't know the difference between right and wrong. It's far too big a subject to deal with in this sermon, but it is fair to say that youngsters will observe their parents and others and take this as an example of how to behave. We have to make sure that we set the very best example. If we do, then children have good role models. Of course, we now live in a secular society where atheism and agnosticism seem to be on the increase, and God is seen as increasingly irrelevant in our worldly wise society. Children will be taught, if they are taught at all, the standards of a society that makes up its own rules. However, for the true Christian, he can find much guidance in the Word of God. And in our booklet, The Keys to Happy Marriages and Families, the following is written on page 20 under the heading, Train Up Your Child in the Lord. Mr. Link wrote this a number of years ago, and he wrote the following. Fathers and mothers are to raise their children in a godly environment. They are to continually teach their children godly principles. How? Children learn by what they see. We teach by our actions as well as by our words. We are not teaching or properly training if our actions do not match our words. We don't teach godly principle either if our words and actions don't correspond with God's commandments. So if we teach our children by our words and by our actions that is sometimes justified to lie, to steal, to kill, to commit adultery, or to use God's name in vain, then we are not teaching our children God's word. We are not bringing them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. That is invaluable advice. In Proverbs 13 verse 24, we read about proper discipline, something that today society tends to frown on, if not completely ban. Proverbs 13 verse 24. He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. This is something we have to do, but we have to be very careful when in public. If a parent is seen implementing this proverb in public, then some interfering person may report them and they could be in trouble with the authorities. I remember a case many years ago Our eldest grandson, who was just a toddler at that time, was misbehaving in a supermarket, and my wife was in charge of him at that time. After being told to behave properly, he had been taught how to. He refused, and my wife marched him to the toilet, the restroom, and proceeded to smack his bottom. That soon corrected his bad behaviour, and he was taken back in a much better attitude. Some modern parenting would appear to just let the child get away with it without learning important lessons, and those undisciplined children can be a real problem when they get older. I have to say that my grandson now has children of his own, and he's taking good steps in bringing them up properly. So he learned a lesson early on. God's way is the best way. It is always the best way. And there are many other references in the Book of Proverbs to the training of children. Just 2 more gems to go today, and both of these are of a financial nature. Bible gem number 9 is found in Proverbs 6 verses 1 to 5, about not being a surety or guarantor for another person. Let us read these verses. Proverbs 6 verse 1. The subheading in the Bible is Dangerous Promises. My son, if you become a surety for your friend, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth. You are taken by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, and deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself. Plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Even though sometimes we may be tempted to become surety for another person, especially a church member, a close friend, or a relative, the Bible contains strong warnings against such conduct. We have a question and answer on this subject entitled, Does the Bible encourage us to become surety for another person? I just want to quote a few comments from this. It says, the Bible warns against becoming surety for both a friend and a stranger. According to the Ryrie Study Bible, the word for stranger is a neutral term and simply designates the borrower. The Sonsino commentary explains that the word stranger refers to another person that is identical with neighbour. This means then that Proverbs 6 verses 1 to 5 cautions us against surety for anyone. The Ryrie Study Bible states, the master teacher warned against becoming liable for the financial obligations of another. The one solution he offers is deliver yourself. The New Student Bible explains, Proverbs warns against putting up security for a neighbour, something like co-signing a loan for a friend who doesn't otherwise qualify. Proverbs supports generosity, but is not open-ended charity in which the amount you must give and the timing are determined by circumstances beyond your control. Too often, it leads to disaster. The Nelson Study Bible points out, these verses in Proverbs 6 verses 1 to 5 warn against putting up surety or co-signing a loan. This does not mean that we should never be generous or helpful if we have the means, only that we should not promise what we cannot deliver. Inability to pay a debt is still a form of bondage and can be a serious problem. As many commentators recognize, the biblical warning refers foremost to becoming surety for more than one is able to and willing to pay. We know that in New Testament times, church members sold their possessions outright and gave the proceeds to the church. They sold what they could. They did not sell what they did not have. By the same token, they did not promise to pay off someone else's debt if they did not have the means to do so. We are not to become surety for the debts of another, for if we have nothing with which to pay at the time of the borrower's default, we will be in deep trouble. This is not to say, of course, that the Bible prohibits husbands and wives to co-sign for a house loan. In God's eyes, husbands and wives are no longer two persons but one flesh. God tells us not to be a surety or a guarantor for another person, and we ignore this instruction at our peril. Bible gem number 10 in this sermon today is found in Proverbs 22 verse 7. Of all the ones mentioned today, and they are all superb in their own right, I have to say that this is my favourite. Proverbs 22 verse 7 says, "The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender." The borrower is servant to the lender. Why is it my favourite? In just 7 words, it makes clear that those who go into debt are not free. They have an obligation to repay any debt for which they are responsible. No ifs and no buts. Had this simple yet brilliant proverb been properly heeded, it is doubtful that we would have had the financial crash in 2008 when people had taken out mortgages and been encouraged to do so by banks and lending institutions on the premise that house prices would continue to rise and to rise, that there would be no housing bubble to burst. We know the heartbreak that this caused so many who had overstretched themselves financially with any real hope of repayment. The pull of credit cards was another factor where just about anyone could get a card with quite a high credit limit, and so many, as they say, maxed up their credit cards. A case of living for today and forgetting about the consequences of such irresponsible actions. Does that mean that all credit is wrong? Well, no, of course, but the borrower must always make sure that they can repay the debt. Of course, something unseen may arise which was never expected, and this can be a problem, but we must always appreciate that indeed the borrower is servant to the lender. I recall in the 1980s when I had a mortgage and the interest rate went up for a very short time only, but it went up to 16%. And then it reduced and reduced to more acceptable levels. But do we have any rainy day money put to one side to cover such emergencies, or do we just spend everything we get as soon as it comes in, never thinking about some savings? It appears to me that so many would sooner go out and eat all the time, buy fancy clothes, and spend up to the hilt, and when difficult times come, as they do cyclically, then they have nowhere to go. They are overstretched to start with, get in debt to maintain their unnecessary lavish lifestyles, and then have to pay the price. The house they are buying may be repossessed, and or the car taken off them, and bankruptcy could follow, and all because this proverb was ignored. Matthew Henry's commentary points out the following: "It is every man's wisdom to keep out of debt as much as he may be, for it is an encumbrance upon him, entangles him in the world, puts him in danger of doing wrong or suffering wrong. The borrower is servant to the lender and makes himself very much a slave to the world." There is an old saying which says, "He who has the gold makes the rules." If a mortgage lender wants to increase the interest rate, he can probably do so, as that they usually make that available to them, any such provisions, in their terms and conditions. The borrower can do nothing about it except to try and switch mortgages, but then they would probably go to someone where they would have to pay costs, and the interest rate may very well be very similar. The borrower is always servant to the lender. Why should anyone put themselves in such a position? It is foolishness to do so, and there is so much wonderful advice in these 7 words, and ignore them at your peril. There is so much more that could be said on this particular subject, but time doesn't allow. Today we have looked at briefly 10 areas. Much more could be said on each one, but we looked at 10 areas that I think should be very helpful to each and every one of us in our Christian life, but life in general. These gems would be helpful to people in the world if they only had the common sense to look at the Book of Proverbs and see how it could be helpful to them. If we fail in any of these, we will miss out on the blessings that they can afford to us. Let us not be like the man who dipped his feet in the sea of knowledge and came out bone dry. The areas which we covered today were to shun evil counsel. Secondly, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Thirdly, we looked at the company you keep. Fourthly, answering and not answering a fool. Number 5, not to be wise in our own eyes. Number 6, to cry out for discernment. Number 7, to hear both sides of the story. Number 8, child discipline. Number 9, not being a surety or a guarantor for another person. And number 10, the borrower is servant to the lender. To implement these pearls of wisdom, these gems, will always be to our benefit, and so let us make sure that God's wonderful instruction is always the basis for living our lives in a way that will be pleasing in His sight. By doing so, rewards will be enjoyed both today and in the kingdom of God forever.